Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome again. We start our afternoon together. I am Manuela Prina. I work at the ETF as a head of unit for the Skills Identification and Development unit of the ETF, where we take care of the innovation and development and the knowledge product of the ETF. This afternoon, I'm very happy to co-host this session where we will focus on resourcing lifelong learning systems together with my colleagues, Siria Taurelli and Arjen Day. So they will introduce themselves really in a few minutes. I remind everyone that we have interpretation channels for our session. So you can select the language that you prefer to follow the session live, and that we really very much welcome your contribution and interaction through using the chat. This is also important because we will have in this afternoon session quite a relaxed time to go through the question and discuss together about your input. I hope you are all in the right room. We have 3 parallel sessions going on. In this room, we will talk about the capacities of actors in building lifelong learning systems and investments in lifelong learning system and resourcing of the systems. So if you're not in the right room, please just drop a message in the chat so our technicians can bring you around and connect you to the right room where you wanted to be. This afternoon, as I said, we will talk about 2 very important ingredients when we talk about lifelong learning systems. On one side, we have what we call the institutional infrastructure. So those elements that really make the system work. And we have on one side, of course, the people, the institutions and organizations. So all actors, including ourselves as individuals, who are part of this ecosystem that really make the system become a reality and deliver on the shared goals. And on the other side, with the, of course, resources that are not only about people, but it's also about making sure that investments reach out really and connect very well to the goals we want to achieve. We will go through some questions together with our panelists, including exploring the capacities of different actors in the systems, from cities to training providers, to universities, and to the wider set of actors that compose lifelong learning. And we will go, of course, through financing and funding and investments tools, including looking at innovation in this very important dimension of our governance of lifelong learning. Before starting our session, let me try with all of you a little exercise. It's an exercise about using our fingers. People say that it takes 1 message to break the ice. So what I would like all of you to do is really take really a few seconds, go on the chat that we have available, and respond very quickly in really few words to this question. What brings you here in this session about resourcing lifelong learning? I ask everybody to answer, including the speakers, so that we really can test if we can use our fingers to use this interactivity modality. So really 5 seconds for the answer. I see messages coming in. Very good. So this is a test so that we also can have the same contributions when the time for questions and answers will come. So I give the floor to Arjen. Arjen.
Yes, I mean, we have gotten quite a lot of messages. They have to do with inspiration, novelty, curiosity, in exchanging experience, and in also looking for partners. So a lot of different expectations. It's clear that we are moving, let's say, from a situation as we were used to, where we had one training institution training for one type of people, with one program, with one source of funding, to something that is rather unknown, which we try to clarify in this session. So I think it's clear why people give these views. Let's see if we can make sense of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Arjen. I really very much hope we will be able to make sense of all your curiosity and your expectations for this session. And before we go to the debate, I give the floor to Siria Taurelli, who will give us a short summary about the conversations that happened in the first 3 days of the conference as regard resourcing lifelong learning. Siria, over to you.
Thank you very much, Manuela. My name is Siria Taurelli. I work at ETF as a coordinator of governance and quality assurance aspects of lifelong learning. And I'm very happy to be part of this conference. And yes, the discussion in the thematic sessions earlier this week has been very rich. So it is actually a challenge to summarize in few points all the things that were shared and the conclusions, Manuela. But one thing I would like to start with is that although there was one session that was very close to the topic that we are discussing today, like especially resources or lifelong learning, I'm also pleased to say and to report that the discussion about capacities, so the human side, as well as the financing, also emerged from across all other thematic sessions in a horizontal manner. So I think we are pretty much at the center of this conference. So concerning the summary, a first point was that to build lifelong learning is a process, and this process affects all aspects of the education and training systems the way we know it now. And this is a process that will bring gradually formal, non-formal, and informal learning under one system as much is integrated as possible. So one consequence is that all people and institutions that act in formal education and training, but also non-formal and informal learning, are involved in this process, which is a change process, and they are both state and non-state actors. However, who is the main beneficiary? The main beneficiary of this systemic transition is the learner, and the learner will be able to find it easier to access learning opportunities, having her skills recognized, to combine learning and work, and no matter how discontinuous his or her journey through learning and employment is, and no matter the age, employment, social status, or previous learning experience. So this was a very important point across the different sessions. Regarding the way forward, so what should we do? There were two main aspects in focus. And the first is that we need to shift the attention from, say, one individual or single institutions onto the idea of partnerships. Dialogue among stakeholders, it's the start of it, but it is only the start. What we should do is to move from dialogue onto cooperation. And cooperation requires dedicated mechanisms for it to happen. Yet there is another move, and the next move is from cooperation to concrete partnerships. And these partnerships are to be oriented to quality outcomes and policy-oriented outcomes. And the idea that emerged was that these partnerships means that different actors, they start a journey together. They start from designing a new policy or even a new project or a new program, no matter whether this happens at national or subnational level, and they undertake and implement this process together. So we have been talking about co-creation or also co-construction. So this is quite an important shift. And what was important in the past days is that we have learned a number of practices, and these practices demonstrate that this is possible today. We are talking about the present. And not only this is possible today, but it happens in different manners. So these partnerships are very diverse. We have partnerships between public and private. We also have a public partnership between, for example, different levels or different regions, as well as cooperation and in-depth partnership also between non-profit or civil society organizations and the business sector. So a lot of different experiences, and they all have a legitimacy in terms of delivering policy outcomes and particular good quality skills development. And of course, capacities of all these actors was a core issue. We have been talking about leadership, capacity of initiative, project management skills, monitoring, collecting evidence, maintaining things on track, and as well as managing financial resources that come from different sources. So this is a quite a complex set of capacity, and they also have to take new responsibilities on in the context of lifelong learning. Last but not least, one of the sessions also put emphasis on the change of mindset, which again requires not only an effort, but also capacity and capability to do so. The second aspect that was in focus in my summary was about mobilizing resources and mobilizing financial resources. So I'm running out of time. Thank you, Manuela, for pointing out. And to make lifelong learning a reality, financial resources are needed on a larger scale than we are used to deal with in a, say, traditional VET system only. So we need to cater for upskilling and reskilling of a very large number of people. We know most of them are adult people, but also young people. And to mobilize these resources, we need different mechanisms. There is no one single method. There are many approaches, and we shouldn't be shy also in experimenting and testing innovative methods, and draw lessons and see what works and what doesn't work, depending on the different contexts. So again, a variety of approaches and a variety of tools. Let me conclude by saying that in addition to learning from practice, we have also tried to grasp lessons that have implications for the system level. So what about system change? And to start with, we know that we all carry a legacy of insufficient cooperation, but to overcome this legacy, we should review and replace possibly the existing cooperation arrangements with new ones, the ones that really allow and can facilitate this co-creation and joint responsibility. For example, in one of the sessions, the participants have highlighted the concept of being inclusive by design. This suggests the fact that this co-creation and co-construction starts from the very beginning. We shouldn't wait until programs are in place already. We should have this joint design and partnership, let me say, from the very beginning. Another a challenge was that positive and at the same time challenging is that a lot of good practice is already in place. So the positive side is that things are actually moving. They're not waiting for order from the top, so to say. But the difficulty is to say how to harvest from this good practice and create not isolated practices of excellence, but standard practice, to turn them into the normality on a wider scale. The third point in terms of system change is that, again, lifelong learning, the bottom line is it means to reach out those who are not learning right now. And to do so, we have to build alliances with those who have experience of it, those who are engaged normally with non-formal and informal learning, and see these actors as being part of the system and recognize them. And again, I don't need to repeat here, there was the issue of capacities, but we will explore more in our conversation together. One hiccups that was mentioned, I think is important to quote now, is that we all have a sense of having our comfort zone. It applies to all institutions, public, private, civil society. We all have our corner, and we have to be careful about it because it may represent an impediment, or at least something that slows down the change. So how to come out of our comfort zone, not only as an individual person, but as institutions and organizations. So the last thing, I know Manuela is saying I'm late, but we have to really check and see what are the partnerships model that work. And designing these partnerships requires a design and an intention, and it required time, but this is very much what we want to further discuss and listening from you too. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Syria, for your introduction. Despite going beyond the time, I think it was absolutely important to actually set the tone for the conversation. And we're now ready to start with our first panel discussion, where we will focus on creating institutional capacities for lifelong learning systems. We will hear about actually 3 not good practices, 3 amazing practices, I want to say, and we will benefit from this contribution to really also think about how we can really support this kind of practices across systems in all the countries. I have the pleasure to introduce you our guests. We have with us Juan Pablo Zuluaga, advisor for lifelong learning of the Ministry of Education of the Mayor Office of Meddling. Meddling is a learning city, part of the UNESCO network of learning cities. This is a network that actually has the aspiration to really put lifelong learning at the core of the investment and commitment of cities. And Medellin is the 2nd largest city of Colombia, and Juan Pablo is actually, joining us from very far away, thank you to the technology that makes this happen. Medellin obtained in 2019 the award as one of really the cities in the world that has really made of lifelong learning a center of attention of the administration and also of the vision of the city. Welcome, Juan Pablo.
Hi to everybody. I want to thank ETF and UNESCO for this invitation. It's a great pleasure to be with you guys today.
Thanks. We have also with us Mr. Tamer Atabarut. Tamer is the director of the Lifelong Learning Center of the Boca University in Turkey. Since 2002, the university has invested and created a center that is focusing on contributing to qualified workforce, offering a diversified set of educational and training programs, including assessment services for different institutions. And I quote from the website of the center: despite the economic and financial crisis growing constantly, especially through the pandemic, the center has managed to really achieve to masses of individuals and serve with lifelong learning activities across many different sectors. More than 100,000 participants and more than 800 institutions have been benefiting from the work of the center. Tamer, welcome to the discussion.
Thank you, Manuela, for this excellent introduction and your complimentary words. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you for being here. And we have also Ronit Ashkenazi. Ronit is the Deputy CEO of Amal Educational Network. Amal is an education network leading player in the Israeli education system, with 120 educational institutions across the country and more than 40,000 students that are part of those institutions. Amal makes of entrepreneurship, innovation, and excellence really the core of its activities and the support to training providers. And is at the forefront of scientific and technological innovation. I have to say that I had the pleasure myself to be in one of the training providers of the Amal network a few years ago and meet the team there, including visiting a center where there was a fantastic program of biomedics with the students very young that were already patenting products, and Amal was actually awarded with one of the awards as being an entrepreneurial community back then. Ronit, it's a pleasure to have you here. Ronit, your microphone is off.
Thank you very much, Manuela, and it's really a great experience to do these entrepreneurial centers, and I hope you will be able to come again to Israel, all of you, and see our entrepreneurial centers and schools.
I will come to all countries as soon as possible, trust me. Okay, let's start our discussion with Juan Pablo. Cities are really extremely important in today's society. We know that 55% of the world population lives already in urban areas, and we know that by 2050, this percentage will even grow to more than 65%. So cities are really have a strong responsibility when we look towards our shared future and also lifelong learning systems. Juan Pablo, let me ask you why lifelong learning is important for a city and specifically for Meddling. Why did you invest in lifelong learning as a city?
Well, just let me say hello to my colleagues as well. I didn't mention them before. Well, for our city, education is a huge commitment. We are convinced that social transformation, of which city is a living proof, has a fundamental pillar, and in that is one, education. To begin, I want to talk a little bit about our city. So I will start with a brief context of the last years of our city. Medellin is a Colombian municipality, is the capital of Antioquia, is the second largest city, as Manuela mentioned before. We have a population of around 2.5 million inhabitants. After having been one of the most dangerous cities in the world in the last century, Medellin, during the drug trafficking, Medellin has managed to transform itself, and basically around education, the transformation has become, and we have been working to become active, creative, proactive. And also one thing that is so important for learning cities, that is we have been learning from our past in order to go further. Between the years 1983 and 1984, Medellin suffered around 46,000 violent deaths. So this panorama of historical violence has been really difficult to overcome in the last years. So we had to work with the educational system and the cultural system at the same time, because we believe that change are only possible when you manage to combine those two aspects. And our society start to demanding through the cultural exchange and through the cultural expressions, this kind of change. So after that, we believe in the 21st century, we had a continuity on the public policies that made this change possible, especially on education. For the current administration of Meddling, of the Major Daniel Quintero, the continuity on educational policies remain a key factor of this social transformation. Nearly 18% of this of the increase in the educational budget has been made by Daniel, our major. So that has been a huge impact, because for the last, I don't know, 25 years or so, we have been having an increase on the educational budget. For us, it has been fundamental. And one thing that I always say when I'm speaking about learning, lifelong learning systems, is that it's so important, because you start applying that concept way before you became a learning city, as the Medellin case. So you have to realize as a city that that you are doing great things in education in order to continue with those great things, because education, as you may know, you have to work for a long time to see the changes in the society, because it's not something that happened right away. So you have to be consistent on that kind of work. So Medellin continues believing in the social recovery, which requires other things, the integration of disadvantaged groups to guarantee equity and the access to quality of education, as the SDG 4 mentioned. So that is so important for learning cities as well. The compromise of Medellin around this SDG, especially to guarantee the inclusion of this group to concern, empowers them with the required tool for the transformation of their environment, is a key. For us, it's so important because Medellin is a valley, but it's surrounded by mountains. So in the mountains, we have rural areas, and the people who live there, they have less, they don't have the same opportunities as the people in the center of the city. So education has to go to all the places in the city in order to help with the transformation. I'm not quite sure what about the time, Manuela. Just let me know.
Yeah, I think we will go ahead with other questions, Juan Pablo, in a minute. I just want to stress this point that you said, that it's 25 years that as a city you are working constantly and consistently on this objective. And I think this is already an important message, that capacity is not a matter of today, and it's not a matter of really a few days, especially when we talk about education and training systems. The time is really a part of the commitment that also goes beyond different administration. So Thank you, Juan Pablo. Tamer, let me turn to you. You lead a very important center in Turkey that has, of course, at its core, lifelong learning. And Turkey has been investing a lot in the concept of lifelong learning already. Can you please tell us what are the key elements of the lifelong learning policy at play in Turkey? And what is the institutional infrastructure that can support its implementation? Tamer, over to you.
Thank you, Manuela. In the scope of key elements of lifelong learning policy in Turkey, I would like to approach in 4 items in general. First, legislation. In terms of legislation, we may say that there is an adequate legislative background in Turkey. And in the recent vision paper of Ministry of National Education for 2023, which is the 100th year of establishment of Turkish Republic, it includes a specific chapter which is targeting the LLL policy. Also in the development plans for 5 years of perspective, there are also some references are stated. And if you look to the previous 2 strategy papers, which were just directly targeting the lifelong learning strategy, they are very complementary. But on the other hand, the last one was over in 2018, and there was not a new one has been just printed yet. In the second item, we may talk about the planning and budgeting. And among the players of lifelong learning in Turkey, the Ministry of National Education, or MONE, contributes to a great extent to planning and budgeting of the delivery of education and training. Of course, there are other actors like private sectors, universities, etc. But the main responsibility over the shoulders of the MONE. And the third stage, I may talk about infrastructure and implementation and the capacity of those institutions, particularly the General Directorate of Lifelong Learning of MONE is responsible for the implementation of this policy in Turkey. But besides this, as I told, besides the MONE, there are other governmental bodies, and also there are many actors like universities, private sector, unions of employers and workers, Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So it is very diverse structure. Among those actors, from time to time, there are collaboration, but again, it is very diverse and not very structured. So the percentage of lifelong learning participation in general as the public has been increasing in Turkey in the recent years, but it's still lower than the EU level. So as far as I remember, it's 5.8 recently as declared as the participation of this lifelong learning. And the fourth and the last one that I would like to just handle is monitoring and quality assurance. And the ministry monitors in the national level, and they prepare report and disseminate annually, but mostly depends on the activities of the ministry, not in general, not covering all the other actors. And for the quality assurance in the wet sector, we have a national qualification authority which was established almost 15 years ago. And initially they started the sectoral standards, and then they established the institutions like they are called as walk tests, which are making the validation of the skills of people. And also they are also conducting the recognition of awards from the other training actors. So in general, if you look to this picture, yeah, there are the legislation, there are some plans, but there are some missing items, and they're mostly centralized and not decentralized. And in terms of the technical capacity, we need a lot to improve, and finance is always critical.
Absolutely, absolutely. We will get in the details of the challenges that relate to capacities in a moment. Tamer, I will get back to you. And thank you very much for outlining the key ingredients. It takes definitely many of them to make the system work, and also a lot of coordination among those ingredients. Ronit, let me now turn to you. To actually have lifelong learning systems that work, we definitely need committed providers where actually the education and training happens. Amal is a very important network that has already achieved to actually see this commitment growing with the providers that are part of the network. I would like to ask you, can you please tell us what does it take to build such a network, and what motivates your members to be part of it? Ronit, over to you.
Thank you. I'm just sharing with you the presentation. Yes. So I think the most important things is to have a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship. As a network, I think that we have a culture of innovation and entrepreneurship, and it reflects all our way of working and dealing with lifelong learning. First of all, we have to read the needs, understand the market, understand the environment, and see the direction of the future. We have to see steps more before what we are going to do. And we have to dare to innovate, and dare to break new ground. And you also have to dare to fail, because without failure, you don't have a success. So we dare to fail. We have to see the direction, understand the market, understand the environment, and of course, work with all the partners. As you can see here, we have the entrepreneurial centers, and we build the entrepreneurial centers when no one believes in it. People understand learning, understand schools. They don't see entrepreneurial centers in education. They saw it only in the industry. So we were the pioneer, and to be a pioneer, it's how you grow up and over. Another important thing is to build motivation, to enhance the curiosity of the people, and to build self-motivation for learning. Because if the students don't have a self-motivation for learning, after they will finish school, they will stop learning. So we try to give them and to teach them to have their own motivation, to have their own passion for learning, to love the experience of learning. And building passion, it begins with the head of the system. It goes with the school managers. It goes with the teachers. Teachers have to be passionate to the work. And then it goes with the students, which have passion. We have to harnessing the world of students and the new technology to learning process. We can't stay outside the world of the students. We have to be relevant to the students. We use smartphones, we teach them AI, we use gamification, virtual reality, artificial reality, all the new technology as part of our teaching, because we believe that they must have relevant and very good experience in their learning in order to continue their learning through their life. Another very important thing is to have a warm and inspiring learning environment.
Thank you, Ronit. Thank you, Ronit. I get back to you in a moment with a second question. I'm very happy to say that, also as inclusion should happen by design, also motivation and innovation at the level of providers should happen by design. We very often tend to say that, some schools are lucky because certain teachers are more motivated than others, but also motivating and supporting teachers, it's something that needs to be part of our effort to really resource the system so that objectives can be achieved. Let me get back to Juan Pablo, and now I will go a bit more in depth in really deep diving in your experiences. And I would like to ask you, Juan Pablo, how do you involve actors in the city? What mechanism do you use? I ask you really to try to be brief as compared to before, so that we can then take also some questions from the audience. Juan Pablo.
Okay, first of all, the articulated work with the different stakeholders is a key aspect of the learning ecosystem that our learning city has been building in the recent years. So first of all, that's so important for us. One of the main strategies that lifelong learning in Meddling has been the integration of the technical and the vocational education in upper secondary education, particularly during the last 2 years of their formation. As a result, when the students finish high school, they both obtain a degree as a secondary scholars and also a certificate of the technical training. So that is really important for us, because that helps with the transformation of our society. This strategy aims to provide the student with the alternatives to continue in the different levels of the higher education, because for us, and as the learning ecosystem as well, it's so important the continuity in the educational system. Also, the participants of the integration better of the representatives of the private sector, the vocational schools, and the universities has been a key factor of this integration, because in order to conceive a better transformation in a lifelong learning system, you have to manage to articulate all the actors, all the stakeholders in the city in order to complement this educational work, not only informal, but also informal education. Because for us, education has to continue through life, as UNESCO said. We have a strategy that is called Nodes for Permanent Education, which are the design of learning spaces that help to improve these capacities and skills of the students in order to be more competitive when they go to the working places. But also the responsibility of the private sector to help the students to continue in the educational system is really important for us. We have different nodes in the city that education focus on those nodes, and also the private sector focus on those nodes. We have topics around electric power, construction, tourism, ITC, health services, commerce, and industrial in general. Because here in Medellin, we are the center of Latin America for the Fourth Revolution Center. So we have to manage to have this articulated process between the private, the public sector, and also with the society. I just want to stop there in order to be.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Thank you very much. So we see that as a city, you actually design this mechanism of cooperation through many different actions, and also involving the different sectors that are important for the economic development and the labor market of the city and beyond the city. Ronit, let me continue with you on the same point of cooperation. When we look at the training providers, one of the most important feature is actually the cooperation in the community and at the local level. How does this happen in the network, and do you find always the members of the community open to cooperation and available to actually cooperate? Ronit.
Yeah. So, of course, we believe that we should work in an ecosystem. As Juan said before me, we should have collaboration with all the stakeholders in the community and all over the country and all over the world. I think it's not just inside the community. So we built collaborations, and I like the word collaboration or partnership, not just connections or working together. So first of all, we work with local companies, and we work with global companies like Microsoft, Intel, Cisco, etc. We have to update the needs and to update the needs from both sides, the company and us as providers, educators, in the level of content and in the level of skills. We find out that the most interesting and fruitful collaboration is having mentors for our students who bring real problems, real challenges that they need to cope with. And they find out that the students have open mind and they can give them ideas. And the collaboration between the students and the mentors, the developers from the industry, it's very fruitful, and it's for both sides. It's a win-win situation, because the industry knows that our youth are their future labor reserve, and it's worth to attract them now, because afterwards, they will be excellent. It will be hard to get them as workers. So they should invest now in collaboration. They should bring the students to the industry and come to our schools. And another point is that companies have commitment to contribute to the community. Also, the world of business, the business world have changed. They are not talking anymore only about money. They begin to work about society, and they begin to talk about the needs for values, to give values to the industry and to give values to the students. So our collaboration is built also on a social value perspective. The entrepreneurship, for example, we have a competition to develop projects and tools and methods for people with special needs in the community. We have projects for sustainability. We find out that if students develop projects as part of their learning, develop projects that have any valuable benefits, that it's contribute to the society, not just to themselves, it's build the collaboration with the industry, with the NGOs, with the authorities, the communities and the local authorities, more vivid, more useful, and all sides found out that they can benefit out of this relationship.
Thank you, Ronit. Thank you so much. I think you touched upon a very important point that we see also emerging from different research and knowledge development actions that also ETF is working on, in particular on these important aspects also of enterprises, but also of consumer behaviors that are extremely important also to shape the choices in terms of market, but also in terms of policies and shape that communities take forward. Tamer, you also mentioned already the importance of the different actors in delivering lifelong learning systems. Let me ask you, are they equally equipped to act in a proactive way? And if not, what are the gaps and what is your experience telling us as you have managed actually to work with many of them with producing excellent results? Tamer.
Yeah, as you stated, while many actors in delivery of lifelong learning services can be listed, the lifelong learning implementation in Turkey is highly central. The policy is, starting from the policy, is very central. And from one perspective, it may be seen as a practical to have a central policy for every lifelong learning institution to rely on, and it may be sounded as a more structured. But on the other hand, this kind of central policies may create gaps in practice. And especially in a huge country like Turkey with different regions, it is a bit problematic. So the participants in lifelong learning in the regions are not identical in terms of the needs, in terms of the skills, in terms of background, and so on. So the demand is very diverse. And at this point, I would like to give one example, which we from our recent study, which was conducted recently in the study of in the city of Istanbul and in the scope of Erasmus Plus project, which is namely called as COMERAP. So this project is focusing on the lifelong learning policies in terms of the district level. So during this project study, we found from different interviews and from different questionnaires with different lifelong learning experts is that the need analysis of the beneficiaries is definitely important. So this is a missing part of the policy-making process in Turkey, actually. So this means that not all the stakeholders are properly involved in the policy-making process. So this finding also gives us two essential results. And one reveals that the policies and naturally the practice do not address the needs of the participants. And which means that this decreases the effectiveness and productivity of the services. And another point tells us the policymakers or the actors in this field of delivery do not assess the outcome regarding what works in their region. So this is also critical. So one fits for all approach is not the best solution for Turkey, such a big country, very segmented country. Hence, even we can mention many actors involved in the delivering of lifelong learning. I or another expert may tell that those actors are not equally included or equipped in a very proactive way.
Tamer, let me ask you another question. As you have in your center, you actually serve also many different institutions. So let me ask you how, or do you have some examples on how actors can actually invest in their own capacities? Somehow, investing in lifelong learning themselves, also as organizations and institutions, to actually respond and really move into the future with the new capacities?
I believe that the stakeholders' engagement and also a strong and a proactive way of collaboration is very essential among the lifelong learning actors. And in order to sustain this, for instance, in the provincial level, there is a commission, and which means biannually for the coordination of the activities in the cities. But this commission is not very inclusive. And especially when we focus on Istanbul, the diversity of the groups makes it necessary to implement a regional analysis for a better function of the learning. And as university continuing education centers, we established a platform which is called as TÜSEM. And this platform meets twice in a year in order to talk about the strategies, the programs, the best practices in their area and in their region. And for instance, we recently organized a TAEX workshop with Minister of National Education in order to harmonize the works of the ministry and the universities, because there is not any harmonized way. So we are active in one way, the ministry in another way, and the recognition of the certificates are not valid. So we are giving the certificates, they are giving the certificates. So we need a monitoring, and also we need a better collaboration. And in terms of this, how we can manage and how we can promote the lifelong learning activities in Turkey, we also plan to organize a week, a lifelong learning week in Turkey, which are planning in this December to promote the lifelong learning nationally. I also...
and you are all invited, by the way. Everybody is invited.
Even we are planning right now virtually, but I hope we will do this in a hybrid model. So you are always welcome for this. But, in another perspective, I believe that internationalization of the lifelong learning is also critical. So we have a lots of way to learn from each other. Therefore, in order to manage this, we are trying to be also very active in the some international bodies, like for instance, in terms of my center, Boğaziçi University Lifelong Learning Center, we are active in European Universities Continuing Education Network, and International Association for Continuing Education in Engineering. So we need some more better dialogue, not only in the national actors, but also in the global manner. We need this if we are talking about to reshape our future in terms of in the risk of this climate change. So we need a more sustainable world. So we can do this better collaboration.
Thank you, Tamer. Thank you also for bringing up the international dimension, which, of course, as ETF, we we know and we support throughout our activities. Ronit, a last question for you, and we really have a minute to go through it. You are already a network that works very much looking at the future, and I think you have made of the future your reality in terms of how your members work every day. But looking ahead at the future, what do you need from policymakers and other actors to actually continue in the excellence that you are building already? Ronit, your microphone is off.
So first of all, I want to emphasize that we want them not to bother us. And I mean, we need autonomy. Autonomy for the networks, autonomy for principal, and autonomy for schools, because Israel government is very centralized, and they try to give us the programs, the timeline, and the most problematic thing is the exams. The matriculation exams, it's killed innovation, because it's very structural. It's like when I was a child, I learned for the matriculation almost the same content, and it's emphasized the content and not the skills. So what we have, we hope that our policymaker, our government, our Ministry of Education will understand that we should make the change in the education system, and we insist on skills and not only in content. That's the most important thing, not to give so much attention to the exams and to give more freedom to the schools and to variety of projects and the ways of evaluation, because if you teach differently, you have to evaluate, you have to assess people differently, otherwise we can't grow up. So that's what we need from them, to be with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Ronit. I think it's a very important message that I'm sure that is shared across the education and training providers. Juan Pablo, to you, the last question also really in a minute. What, from your point of view, are the most important actions that cities should put in place to ensure lifelong learning systems?
Well, I will be quick, I promise. Well, first of all, as Ronnie said before, the integration also with the global companies is a key factor of the learning, lifelong learning system. For our own experience, the integration and the permanent feedback between state, educational institutions, enterprise, and also society is so important. So our city believes the power of the education for the transformation of individuals and society is really important. Therefore, the lifelong learning should take into account the requirement of individuals, the communities, and the economical system as a whole. And the second part, I just want to be quick in this part as well. I think, as Tamer said before as well, for the policy making, it's so important the data analysis. In our city, we have an observatory just for the educational and the quality of education. So for better decisions for the politicians and for better practice in the policy making is so important to take in account all the history and all the information that you can acquire as a society. Those 2 points for me are so important right now.
Thank you so much. I see my colleague Arjen is typing frenetically on the computer. He's just close to me. And I see that also the chat inbox is really quite full. We will probably not have time to answer the questions because we have exceeded the time for the first panel. But I would like Arjen to give us a summary of the key questions that have emerged. And then I would kindly ask our panelists to really take a few minutes to look into the chat and maybe pick up some questions before we wrap up the session. Arjen.
Yes, I mean, we have had a discussion in this chat. There was first this importance of that all the countries emphasize, because that's important to set a framework for lifelong learning. At the same time, Ronald now has said, but we need autonomy, we need innovation. And we see these excellent examples from the university in Istanbul, from the city in Colombia, from the network in Israel. But how are they going to be part of a lifelong learning ecosystem? That's the question. And also, how do we ensure that this will be, as what Syria said, will be designed for inclusive approach. So for instance, for me, for one of the issues with the presentation of Jean Pablo is that there are many poorer people coming to Medellin from these rural areas. Will they also be able to profit from these lifelong learning opportunities? Because we often see that the lifelong learning opportunities go to the ones that are already better educated. So that's one of the concerns. Then the collaboration that Tamar was stressing. How should that be organized? Should it become bottom-up? Because he took the initiative to, let's say, discuss with the government and other actors. And then there's also the role of the private sector. We had a long discussion on this too. The private sector clearly has an interest to invest in its own staff. And this was also Hamid, who was very active on the chat. He really emphasized this. It is very important for the company to develop, to invest in its own staff. But of course, here we deal with also other actors, other people. Of course, Ronald said it's very important that these companies invest also in these young people that are not yet working for this company, because otherwise they will not be able to get them. But is it so easy to mobilize these private sectors, to the private sector to invest more and to collaborate more? So a little bit more of the how does the system work? Because this is about a conference about systems. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Arjen. As I said, we will not have time to answer comprehensively the questions. I would really like to ask our guest speakers to then leave a comment in the chat, but I will challenge them to actually give us 3 words that summarize their key messages, also taking into account the questions that have emerged in the chat. And to leave us those keywords that really would shape the investment in capacities and in institutional roles and responsibilities in building lifelong learning systems that are, of course, inclusive and that will deliver on our shared goals. So, who wants to be challenged first? I would say Tamer. 3 words.
Big lottery to me. Big lottery to me. Yeah, as a last word, I may say that if you want to reach a more inclusive and sustainable world, we need a better collaboration between the different actors. And in order to just succeed this collaboration, we need from bottom to top approach. And also what I may say that as the universities, we are ready from what we learned from our research-based data to just share with the private sector and also other stakeholders. So let's come together and work for a better world.
Thank you so much, Tamer. Juan Pablo, your 3 words.
Only 3, okay. Okay, I believe the integration of the learning system, I mean, that's it. You have to integrate all the actors, private, official, public sector, international, everybody.
You see, he was even more synthetic, so he will probably win the challenge. Ronit, over to you. 3 words.
Yeah. What I take is that we have very different people and many regions, like Tamer said, and people that are not inclusive. And we should find a way how to connect everyone to this process. It means all the stakeholders and also all the learners, all the citizens, everyone, even from far away, should be included, inclusive, and it's not very easy to do it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ronit. I think we will need a conference only on this topic. So after the Lifelong Learning Week in Turkey, we will definitely try to set up also a moment where we can go more in depth and also discuss all the questions that have come through the chat. Now we take a 5 minutes break. I would like really to give a big thank you to our guest speakers and also to thank all of you for all the questions that came through the chat. We take a 5 minutes break, take a coffee, a glass of water, stretch your legs, and we see each other in 5 minutes to talk about investments and financing of lifelong learning systems. Thank you very much.
Brava.
Pablo, over here.
Welcome back, everyone. Good afternoon again, and thank you for the first group of speakers and to Manuel and Aren for managing the first part of the discussion. We are now moving to the second part, which is about, again, resources, but different type of resources. We are talking about financing and financial resources. I would like, as a first thing, to introduce our guest speakers. Anna Canata, good afternoon. You are head of department at European Investment Bank.
Hello, thank you, Syria. It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you to you for being here. We have with us also Robert Palmer. Robert, you are an expert of different financing modalities and instruments, and we want to hear from you about it. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Fanny Broussin, you work at the Public Employment Services in the region of Brussels, and welcome and thank you for being here. We also look forward to hearing from you. And thank you, Fanny. And last but not least, Mrs. Marcia Sica from Compagnia di San Paolo, the largest banking foundation in Italy. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Syria and everybody, and thank you for the invitation.
Okay, very good. So we have important questions to discuss, and in general terms, what we are aiming at is really to discuss through which mechanism can we efficiently mobilize and use funds for creating and sustaining lifelong learning, and how can this funding mechanism best fulfill the objective of inclusiveness. So these are the broad question for our speaker, but we will go one by one. And I actually would like to start big from European Investment Bank, and to understand better what does these broad questions mean for your institutions. And in particular, I would like to quote from your website that education and training are arguably the most efficient tools to support human empowerment and development. Knowledge and skills are the prerequisite to help employability and foster social inclusion, while research and innovation are key to make society more competitive and create new jobs. So can I ask you, what is the strategy and what is the approach of the European Investment Bank in the education, training, and skills development sector in general? And what are the issues that you are deploying to that scope?
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Syria. As you mentioned, at the EIB group, we do see education and training as a key sector to support in light of a transition that focuses on green and digital development, but also with a focus on equal opportunities, on growth, on empowerment of disadvantaged area of the population. And we know that education and training are key aspects that can help support all these. In this respect, just mentioning what we do in education and training directly, the EIB has been has been supporting 48 billion in terms of loans in the last 20 years. So we do provide a significant support to this sector. And this does not mention what we do for SMEs and what our colleagues at the European Investment Funds do as well. Now, you asked me about the strategy. When we finance or when we advise investment projects, as an institution, we are demand-driven, which means that we answer to the specific request of public and private promoters. Therefore, in this respect, our strategy is to support education and training initiatives when they happen, where they happen, being receptive of the plans that are brought to us. In complement to that, what we do at the European Investment Bank, the European Investment Funds, we also develop specific financial instruments that can ease some issues that are there on the financial markets that may prevent investments in training and education to happen. So in this context, when we look at, above all, in adult training, skill development, this is extremely important for us, because this is really a sector that is at the cornerstone between education and creating jobs, creating opportunity of development for countries. You may be asking, okay, what does it mean concretely? What are the type of things, what are the type of projects that we really finance? Yes. And when we look at the learning system,
if you can make some examples, Anna, and
sure.
also in case you have some specific highlight with regard with novelties that can be brought about by the drivers of digital and green transitions. But over to you, please.
Of course. I would like to, I think, to understand what we do, we can consider 3 different angles. The first one is the fact that we provide project advisory and loans to private and public training providers. And this could be institution, say public or private, or a collaboration between public and private, from initial education to adult training. And we can complement where we provide our loans, but our loans can be complemented by resources from the European Commission, can be complemented from guarantees from the European Commission or other initiatives. So to give you an example, in the last couple of years, we have worked both with Ireland and with Romania for development in their universities. For example, in Ireland, we had a large project to restructure, support the revision of the Institutes of Technologies in the country. In Romania as well, we supported and we advised specific university when they were reforming their curricula and reforming the type and restructuring the type of laboratories that they needed to support learning. In Serbia, we are supporting digital training for teachers at primary and secondary level of education, which is very important for a transition. Often, as an institution, we might be known for what we do in terms of infrastructures. This is because this is more visible. This is where countries, promoters need a lot of funds, but we are very keen to support the digital transition. We are very keen to support teacher training, to support the investment that go along with the reform of learning system. So this is the first area. A second area is when we finance SMEs or mid-caps. So private companies, normally these are private companies, small companies who want to develop, who are developing and who need more workforce. We do see the development of SMEs and mid-caps as a very good investment to support innovative jobs, to support the jobs for the future. And we are quite attentive to support also the training investments that private providers and that companies may have. So, for example, we had a few investments in the automotive sectors, which of course is a sector that is facing a lot of change, a lot of evolution in their manufacturing, and where we have a promoter that is investing in a new type of manufacturing system. We also support the training that they can provide to employees and investments in this respect. And this is for us supporting learning on the job, which is extremely important. As a third area, we finance student loans and individual training accounts. And this is, let's say, on the one hand, we support the offer or training, and it's also important. We see the system as a whole, so supporting also the demand side. When to highlight something specific and new in this respect, an instrument that is brilliant, in my view, and is worth mentioning, is what has been developed by my colleagues at the European Investment Fund, which is the FC Skills and Education Pilot. This is an instrument that supports access to finance in the form of loan or loan-like financing guarantees, or loan-like financing that is guaranteed by the EU, which means that we can give funds at a lower cost to final beneficiaries. Final beneficiaries can be students and learners, students at higher education, secondary students, but most likely third higher education students or adult learners. The recipient can be enterprising that are investing in supporting the skills of their employees, or also higher education providers. This financing then is provided by financial intermediaries. Financial intermediaries can be banks, but can also be alternative lenders like universities or other education providers who are acting as we are acting in this case as a recipient of the guarantee and then giving the funds to the students. So what these instruments does is focusing directly on the demand for or demand of financing for learning, and doing it at a cost of financing that is lower, allowing a larger access to the instrument. So, as I said, three aspects: supporting financing in the training providers, financing companies that invest in learning, and enabling students, young students, adult students, to have the resources that are needed to improve their learning.
Thank you very much. What I would like to underline is that the EIB has been able to diversify the instruments, not the targets, because you are addressing, I think, progressively more and more also SMEs, as well as individual students through the loans, as well as diversification of instruments. And I think I would take this as an important message, because we need a diversification of instruments actually to multiply the method and the approach to financing, because for lifelong learning, we heard from the previous panel that we do not only need capacity, but also resources to change and innovate. Allow me to move now to continue our round of first questions. And I would like to ask Robert Palmer. And we heard that you are making research for a UNESCO global report on levy finance training funds. And in many countries, this is an instrument that has been considered actually for many years. This is not a new one. And can you please tell us why do countries or sectors within countries set up training funds? What do they expect from it? And what do they want to achieve through establishment of these training funds? Can you give us an overview?
Sure. So you're certainly right that levy finance training funds have been around in many countries for a lot of years now. I mean, as of end of last year, about 75 different countries operated such training funds, either on a national or sectoral basis, with some countries, operating both types. And about 10 countries, as of the end of last year, were looking into setting up such funds as well. So there's a large number of countries that are interested in this. Why are they doing this? I mean, employer training levies, they can be an effective way to pool resources from employers and earmark them for expenditure on training. These kind of levy schemes are often set up to address market failures that cause skill constraints in firms. And this may be done through increasing training in the firms themselves, encouraging employers to train staff, or through strengthening the pipeline of employees through funding to initial vet. And of course, many countries have also built in cross-subsidization mechanisms so that some non-levy paying firms can in some way benefit. And there are examples around the world of many such approaches, to support disadvantaged groups, to support training-related active labour market programs, and in countries with large informal economies, there's quite a lot of use of intermediary organisations to support reach out in that area as well. I mean, in some countries, however, the sort of motivation of countries to set up such funds is really about trying to, frankly, create another stream of revenue to use pretty much as the government wants to fund training, sometimes not fund training. There's a lot of examples of very supply-driven vet systems being supported through such levies, and more alarmingly, a few examples of percentages of these levies being diverted into central budgets. Obviously, these kind of training funds are not effective, at all in terms of pushing a demand-driven BET agenda. In terms of broad objectives of training funds, then among national funds, then by far the most commonly stated objective is to increase the incidence of employee training in the levy contributing firms. That said, the majority, I think 80% or more of national training funds are multi-purpose. So they have this objective of increasing employee training, but they also have other objectives, to reach non-levy payers, disadvantaged groups, unemployed youth, sometimes small firms, and a lot of the funds in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, are also used to finance initial VET. And meanwhile, the sector training funds, of course, they're much more common in European countries. Where they're set up and run by the private sector themselves, then they often have quite an exclusive focus on one primary goal, which is increasing the training of employees in that particular sector. A few do have also redistributive mechanisms, but majority are focused on this one objective of increasing in-firm training in levy-paying firms.
Thank you for this quick overview. It was challenging, but I think it's very interesting. First of all, that these training funds are known, and you quoted as many as 75 countries at least using, whether a national sectoral level, this scheme or this approach. They work. However, there are also tensions, perhaps, between for example, between the levy contributing companies and the way the government use these funds. So not always the use of these funds are, so to say, demand driven. They're rather used top down, and this may generate a certain, perhaps, dissatisfaction among those who contribute to the levy. So more shift towards employee training in some countries, at least, it seems to be demanded. So there are pros and cons, and it also shows that each instrument requires to be governed. The things, reaching the objective of the initial purposes stated on paper, they may not always automatically come. So there is a need for follow-up. I continue with the next speaker, who is Fanny Broussin. Fanny, you're working in a public structure, is the employment service of the Brussels regions, and you are managing partnerships, but in particular, you have been dealing and you have initiated yourself something called social, at least 3 or more projects, by using social impact bonds. And I would like to ask you to explain us in few words what the social impact bond is and how it works.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Hello, Syria. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, because we think social impact bonds is a very interesting tool. And we used it already 3 times. So social impact bond is a financial mechanism which aims to create a collaboration between a public institution, a service provider, or let's say an operator, that can be, for example, a non-profit organization or something like that, and private investors. And they all collaborate around the same objective, which is the prevention or the resolution of a social problem. So how does it work? There are actually four stakeholders. So the public institution, there is the public institution who wants to test an innovative project, but who doesn't want to take any financial risk. There is the operator, of course, who proposes an innovative methodology to respond to the problem. There are private investors, and their rule in the social impact bond is that they pre-finance the project. And there is also a fourth stakeholder, an independent evaluator who evaluates regularly throughout the project the effectiveness of the project. So in concrete terms, the public institution, the service provider, and the private investors will co-create the project, and that's really important to keep in mind because it's about the co-creation. So they will co-create the project, meaning the goal of the project, the KPIs, the schedule, etc. The private investors finance the project from the start, and it allows the service provider to benefit from significant startup capital. And at the end of the project, the public institution will reimburse the investor for their funding with a predefined rate of return, depending on the social impact created by the project, and depending therefore on the savings actually made by the government. Because in our case, if we have less unemployment, the government is making savings in terms of unemployment benefits, in terms of public health, etc. But if the results targets are not met by the service provider, the public institution will just not reimburse the investors. So that's the basic concept of the social impact fund.
Thank you very much. Okay. Yes, please, Phil.
No, I just wanted to say that it has, of course, multiple benefits for each stakeholders. But if I may take one more minute just to say that for the public institution, it has very interesting benefits because we are often seen as quite slow institutions and not always fitting with the reality of the field. And thanks to the social impact bond mechanism, we can finance innovative projects that would not have access to traditional financing, or probably not in the same amounts. So we are financing innovation, but while we are outsourcing the risk, because the mechanism acts as a guarantee for the public partner, because we only reimburse if the results are achieved. And yeah, that's it, maybe.
That's very interesting, and you actually answered the question I wanted to make. So why did you why this instrument was chosen by the administration? And it's very interesting that as a public sector, as a public service, you are able to initiate innovation and to react also to the say decreasing popularity of public sector among citizens because of criticism of slowness, not being demand-oriented and so on. And this innovation really comes to as an answer, a very constructive answer to also the disaffection of the citizens. So I think that's very, very important. Mrs. Sica, you work at Compagnia di San Paolo. You are responsible for a whole mission of the Compagnia di San Paolo, which is the largest actually private bank foundation in Italy. And your institution is devoting quite substantive resources to create opportunities of learning, skills development, especially for youth. And I think we really would like to hear about more about that, and what are the main financing instruments you are using to that purpose, and if you can give us 1 or 2 or 3 examples from what you're doing.
Sure. Let me briefly introduce what we do in the field of lifelong learning in Compagnia di San Paolo. As every year we invest a consistent part of our resources and we develop a significant number of our intervention in this field, in the field of education, training, and lifelong learning. All Compagnia's intervention dedicated to education contribute to achieve the aim, knowledge and skills one of the 6 transversal goals that our governance has set, together with well-being, equal opportunities, digital and green transformation, to structure our 2021-2024 strategic plan. So lifelong learning is exactly at the center of our strategy. As you asked me about our main financing instruments, we normally use a set of financing mechanisms to support education, training, and lifelong learning. We use both grants, which are recoverable funds, to sustain a public institution and not-for-profit organization working in lifelong learning sector. And we use also investment funds, engaging ourselves in impact investing, implying funds aimed at generating a measurable, beneficial social or environmental impact, with also a financial return to investors. And in this case, knowledge and skills of people involved represent the impact of our investment. Right now, we are also working to blend these 2 financing mechanisms in order to be more flexible, and we hope also to maximize our impact. The grant-making component is our traditional way of investing in education and lifelong learning. And in the last years, a number of innovative tools have been put in place, have been tested. We implemented it, and we also evaluated it in a very rigorous way. So I could mention just briefly 3 main mechanisms, funding mechanism coming from the grant-making component. Direct grants to public institutions and not-for-profit entities to fund education and lifelong learning. To fund programs and projects targeted to a wide range of beneficiaries in different age stages, and the projects envisage very diverse typologies of education and training models, formal, informal, individual, supporting digital technologies and artificial intelligence in education. The second example I would like to mention is an asset building mechanism that our implementing body called Ufficio Pio, our body aimed at supporting vulnerable families in Torino, has set in the last years. It is a specific funding mechanism to match family saving to allow young secondary school students to continue and complete their studies, and also being able to choose the best university or the best upper secondary school path. It is a mechanism that puts people, and specifically young students and their family, at the center, and allows them to choose, to save, and to multiply funding, and in this way building by themselves directly their future. The third example of funding for education, maybe which would be interesting for everybody to share, is a payment by result project called Articolo più uno that Compagnia has been developing in Torino for the so-called NEET, so young people with very low employability conditions, so far from training and work. And the payment by result funding mechanisms that we have put in place is based on the result that we wanted to achieve for these fragile young people from 16 to 25 years participating in the project. Basically, the mechanism foresees that institutions and third sector agencies working in the project with the young beneficiary are paid by Compagnia only if results are achieved, and the results are measured on the basis of skills acquired by youth and employment opportunity actually guaranteed for them. So these are just 3 examples of our set of financial tools to invest on education and lifelong learning.
That's very interesting. And I think you have expanded further this idea of impact in investment and the notion that an investment is made to achieve a result which goes beyond the immediate or the exclusive return on investment, but there is an interest behind. There is an outcome with an interest with someone else that that achieve a progress, that makes progress in his or her life. And I find it very interesting because of what I gather from what you say, and also what Fanny Brusana started to say earlier, is that it implies also a new awareness, or perhaps a new mindset on the part of investors. So we are able, or you are able, through an instrument also generates a certain demand. So it meets also the new demand of investors, including private individuals, small investors that want to use their savings or their investment for something which has a return in terms of outcomes, benefits, and at social, individual and social level. And the challenge, if I may here, is, and we can come back to that later, is also how to define these outcomes. And I know there is a whole wealth of knowledge being developed here, and technical research and understanding on what does it mean to measure and how to collect evidence about these beneficial outcomes. But we can come back to that. And thank you very much so far. And I would like to now move to a second round of questions. And for that reason, I'll go back to Anna Canato, European Investment Bank. You have mentioned earlier that the EIB is demand-driven. So you try more and more to be demand-driven. And can you tell us, where do you see in terms of education and training, skills, lifelong learning, where is this demand coming from? Do you see different geographical zones, or a sector, or group of people, or certain type of government? Do you see some changes in terms of the demand for lifelong learning?
Sure, thank you for the question. Maybe I need to start by clarifying something. When we say that we are demand-driven, this is how it is in our statutes. We are a public financier, so we are not looking for the return of investment, but we don't have a business development role. We accompany promoters in what they want to do. That's, in this sense, we are demand-driven. We are not going to a promoter, be it a state in Europe or outside Europe, suggesting projects. We are accompanying the projects that arrive. So, for example, as social impact bonds were mentioned, we can support social impact bonds, but they come from promoters that are looking in that direction. This is what we mean by being demand-driven. In terms of what type of requests do we receive nowadays, and are they changing over time? I mean, logically, being demand-driven, it really depends on a promoter by promoter condition, whether the ministries, the municipalities, or the private promoter, what type of view they have of education and training and how they should be funded. So whether they are willing to go for different financial instruments, and how they set their political and their funding priorities. I must say that in the situation today, what we see is still very much what we would call traditional type of demands to renew, refurbish, or extend education facilities. However, this is to be expected, because the funding gap that we see in education inside Europe, outside Europe, is just enormous. And there is a huge backlog of investments to maintain education infrastructure. And if you add to that the needs to adapt infrastructure, curricula, teacher training to what are the changes in terms of new pedagogies, new digital development, this makes I would say, the basic funding request is something that is already extremely high. Something that we are noticing outside Europe are increasingly requests to support technical universities. So institutes of tertiary, at the tertiary level, who are focused on specific professions or specific skills, and try to be more aligned to the local job market needs. This is something that we love very much. We like very much to support, because we think it's a right direction for countries that are developing to align the trainings and the skill on the economic development of the country, and this can also help to retain young people, brilliant young people in the country, and when it is a problem to go against brain drain. To conclude, I would say that we are a financier, so we try to improve as much as we can and to guide the projects that we receive. We don't choose our projects. We would be thrilled and very happy to see more coming in the area of adult education in terms of reskilling or skilling at the job. But I think what we see from our end is what was also mentioned in the previous panel. These type of projects require a lot of collaboration, require very clear strategy, and from a financial point of view, they do require what I like to call an integrator. An actor often is a public one that acts as the collector of resources and maybe the actor taking risk to invest in this aspect. And it could be public, it could be private, it could be a mix of the two, but clearly when we are looking at skilling and reskilling is less straightforward than when we finance a Ministry of Education for renewing primary skills. It will require more collaboration between different actors, and this is what we see happening from the field.
Thank you very much, Anna. I move quickly to the next speaker because now we are really running against time, but I take your quote of the sector needs an integrator. I think that's captured very, very well the situation and the needs in lifelong learning. And Robert, talking about integrator and integration, do skills development funds or training funds need to be integrated with other instruments? And in other words, my question is, would you advise for more training funds in future or less? What would be your take? Do they work and we need more training funds, or do we need to integrate with different instruments?
Sure. So, I mean, it's not a sort of yes or no answer to that question, of course. It depends on the context. I mean, there are, certainly what you might call preconditions to good functioning training funds. And there are perhaps three I could flag up. One is obviously governance, and this is perhaps the singular most important precondition for a well-functioning training fund. I mean, because employers are contributing, they need to be heavily involved in the process of designing the levy rate, the fund purpose, objectives, the fund operations, and overall governance. And really, I mean, one of the things that came through in the global review was that just having a substantial representation of employers on the board of training funds is by itself not enough. It's those individuals need to also have a significant voice, and the fund itself needs to have a good level of autonomy from the government so that it can really represent the interests of the levy payers. The second precondition is really transparency. So and this relates to all aspects from levy collection to administration, disbursement, so that levy payers and other stakeholders know how much funds are collected, where and how they're spent, and to what extent they are linked to the stated objectives. Often objectives are stated, but money is used elsewhere, or maybe there's 5 objectives and they're very heavily skewed. The funding allocation is very heavily skewed towards one of them. And crucially, what results are achieved. So having that very transparent as well. The third area is measuring results. So unless the results are measured properly, and in the vast majority of all countries, including European countries, results are not measured properly, in the sense that the focus is on outputs. How many people are reached through the training fund, or reliance on success stories and anecdotes. There's there are a number of countries that use things like tracer studies and employer perception studies, which are much more useful. Very few countries use more rigorous approaches. Obviously, those are much more expensive, more complex to do, but do give you more clearer results. So, I mean, the question, should there be more training funds? I think that, definitely, if the funds are used strategically, they can help orientate whole systems, or if not sectors, towards strategic, large-scale objectives. But they do need to be designed properly. Otherwise, they can be another tool which perpetuates a supply-driven approach. Funding itself doesn't change the system unless it's oriented in the right way. So those three things, governance, transparency, and ensuring a focus on measuring results are really what's key.
Thank you. That's very clear, and these are very important points. And again, the last one is about measuring the results. And what are the results? Are we talking about just the quantitative deliverables or real benefits for people? So I think this coming very strongly across this panel. And talking about results, Fanny, the question to you is there something that you and your organization and your employment service would have not achieved if not with this special partnership through social impact bond? I mean, what was the added value?
There are many benefits for the public sector with the social impact bonds. As I told you before, the social impact bonds allow operator to have significant startup capital, and I think it's something really important because they can develop really faster than in a traditional way, because they can focus only on their project objectives and they don't have to worry about seeking funding. We had a very good example with our first social impact bond that we launched like 6 or 7 years ago. The goal of this project was to test quite special concept of mentorship. It was a mentorship between young job seekers with immigrant background who would be mentored by people over 50 who use their professional experience to accompany them and support them in their job research. And the challenge was especially in this matching of these two target groups, so the young job seekers and the people who are about to leave the job market. And so the operator, thanks to the social impact bond, the operator was guaranteed to receive the 300,000 euro for his pilot project, and I think it's a quite good amount of money compared to traditional subsidiary or grants, and they really could spread quite fast. And we actuaries, we had quite quickly a strong confidence that this concept was an excellent solution for job seekers who have major difficulties in understanding the labor market in Brussels or in Belgium, and big difficulties in fitting in it. And now, right after the 3 years of this pilot project, we have made this, because it was a big success, we have made this concept permanent. We have now 4 mentoring operators in Brussels. They are all financially supported by actuaries. And its mentorship is basically embedded in the solutions that we offer to job seekers. And this concept of this special mentorship is now spreading in Europe. So it wouldn't have been possible in that way without the social impact bond.
So that's very interesting, and I'm learning really something new, because here you are telling us that it is possible to move from individual good practice to scaling up and make it at system level. So I think that's very, very good news, and in actually very short period of time. And I now want to move, and I'm conscious of the time, Marcia, a question, because we have been hearing about the public policies from Fanny Brusana, and what is the relations between your project of the Compagnia di San Paolo and public policies? I don't want this to make it a difficult question, but some people may wonder, you have your own private decisions, and why is this isolated or separated from public policy? Is it so?
So, of course, we are a philanthropic organization. By the way, our mission is focused on people, especially vulnerable people, and we play a so-called subsidiary role with regard to public institutions, public policies, and private programs. I believe that in this respect, in the lifelong learning ecosystem, our best added values can be described as we can fund in a very flexible way. We can support areas of interventions which can be difficult to cover by the public sector. Furthermore, even being perfectly accountable to our stakeholders, we can risk and sometimes even fail. So we can carry out experimental exercise, which could be very beneficial to the setting of public programs and policies if this experimental exercise would show effectiveness. In addition, we can also catalyze and connect very different resources, competencies, and entities involved in lifelong learning. Maybe I can just mention the case of the National Fund Against Educational Poverty, which is one of the first and biggest national experiences of public-private engagement toward education in Italy, where Italian bank origin foundations, the Italian government, and the National Forum of the Third Sector, thanks to resources of Italian foundations, and also thanks to a special fiscal advantage mechanisms, were able to build a fund dedicated to one of the most unacceptable inequality phenomenon affecting Italy and also other countries, which is the so-called inequality in education, unfortunately affecting more than 1 million of children and minors in our country. The fund can manage a significant amount of money, can sustain inclusive and innovative education projects all over Italy, especially in the region where education reflects higher inequalities, and allows to test new methodologies and tools, carries out solid evaluation of all projects, so measure and give evidence to results, as we were saying. And the perspective is that this experience should become structural policy of the Italian government to fight education inequalities. This is just an example of cooperation between foundations, third sector and the Italian government. By the way, we have also we launch also other complementary actions. For instance, we support experimental projects funded by our foundation and implemented by the third sector or universities. As I said, so providing also the possibility, if they are effective, to inform future public policies. And we also support evaluation exercise complementary to lifelong learning public programs. As I said, very useful to improve actual policies and shape better future ones. So we managed to integrate in an ecosystem which implies the public institution, philanthropic world, private enterprises, cultural entities, the third sector. I think the key word is a well-defined, effective governance.
Thank you very much. That's really the best way to wrap up and conclude. And I take from you this very good idea of taking the risk of innovation and experimentation, and then to be able to offer results at a larger scale and national level, as well as playing the role of subsidiarity and complementarity. I think all these are very interesting notions. We stop here for the panel. I would like to ask Arjen. I know, Manuela, we are a little bit late, but if you allow, we take our participants 5 more minutes. And Arjen, is there anything coming up from the chat? I know I've seen many messages, and I still want to ask our speakers to maintain, to prepare for the final words after Arjen.
Yeah, well, I mean, from the chat, we did not get a lot of reactions. I tried to put a lot of questions there about these new mechanisms, especially these social impact funds. I think they're very innovative and very new. But there has been more, let's say, people paying attention to what has been said. So there's no new additional information coming in. So I think we can move on straight to the last questions.
Okay, the last question, and then I give the floor back to Manuela, is just if you are imagine you are in a global summit, and this global summit is populated by head of states and government, and you have the opportunity to be 30 seconds in an elevator or at the coffee counter and give a piece of advice to a very important high-level policymakers. So what would you advise in terms of choosing an instrument or focus on an area, or what would you like to tell him or her? Anna, can I start from you? Really 30 seconds.
Sure. Lovely question. I would say that adult learning and reskilling is a huge problem that cannot be tackled with the instruments and the training provider that we have today in many countries. So it needs to be prioritized.
Thank you. Robert, what's your advice to the head of government?
Sure. So, I mean, every government wants to get the private sector involved in skills development, and you know, a key way of doing that is by encouraging private sector contributions, and you know, government should do that in a formula, in an approach which brings the private sector to the table and doesn't just treat them as a cash cow. You know, that's what I say.
The message is very clear: no cash cow at the table. Fanny, your opportunity to speak at the Global Summit.
I would just say that the social impact bond is a win-win mechanism for all the stakeholders, and especially for the public sector whose finances are under pressure. So change your mindset and just dare to be innovative through this kind of public-private partnership.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Martial, you have the honor to be the last one.
So I would recommend mechanisms able to overcome fragmentation, segmentation of different programs. I would also recommend solid data management and evaluation mechanisms. And as a philanthropic entity, I would recommend that funding for education should always consider inclusive objectives as a mainstream.
Thank you. And with that, we have a lifelong learning system in place. Manuela, what do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I would like really to thank our speakers also of this second panel. I think it was really an eye-opener. I would like to say that I'm not surprised that we didn't have many reactions, because somehow for the word of education financing is always a bit of a I would say, a hot topic, and also something that I think we should also, as ETF, but also as international organizations, really support more in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of attitude to take the risk and you really to invest and attract those investments, as Anna was saying, that have been really lagging behind for many years in the sector. So I think it's a very important message. We heard very important messages throughout our panel, both as regard capacities of the different actors, of education and training providers, of universities, of government, of private sector. I think one of the messages is that we all have to make a step to change something, to actually move towards building lifelong learning systems. And this change needs, of course, also to include resources, their mobilization, that follow some mechanisms that are very important, like cooperation and integration, I think are some of the words that have been repeated more often through the panel. Something I think is key is that this is possible only and when we share that important word, which is the impact. So when the impact is clear, the goal is shared, then makes things possible. It makes partnership possible, it makes integration, it makes cooperation, it makes financing and funding possible. So we need to really dare to have a clear goal and here a clear impact which is shared across communities, nations, and internationally. We started our session today asking you a question, and I would like to conclude as we say goodbye to each other before we see each other all around the world. We really look forward to invitations to come and see you as we are allowed to travel. But as we started the day with this cascade of comments in the chat as regards expectations, I would like to ask you to leave your comment in the chat as you leave, before you click on the leave button, and give us the keywords that you bring with you from this session with us today. I thank you again very much. I thank Syria, I thank Ariane for being with us, and all our technicians, the big machine and the interpreters. We see each other tomorrow morning. The conference will continue and we will bring back the results of this session and the key messages in the plenary meeting tomorrow morning. Thank you very much, and keep investing in lifelong learning and building capacities so that we can work together. Goodbye and thanks.